thousands of years. That's Egypt. This is Palestine. Of course, right in the center there, you recognize this is looking from the east towards the west, and that in the middle is called what? The Dome of the Rock. The Dome of the Rock, which is one of the sacred spots, one of the main sacred spots of Islam. The old city of Jerusalem, it's divided up into 4 quarters. This is part of the Arab quarter. Anybody know what the Israeli national sandwich is? It's not a hamburger. It's a falafel. I can't get that one slide down. But it's a falafel. It's got deep fat fried chickpeas, and you eat them on the street every day. Of course, this would be a Muslim near the Temple Mount area, near the Dome of the Rock, who is praying towards Mecca, right? Which is always facing towards Mecca. In this case, it's east. Washing up before they go into the Dome of the Rock. These would be Orthodox Jews living in another part of the city. Maybe on their way to the synagogue, or perhaps on their way to the Wailing Wall. The Wailing Wall, or the Western Wall, I'm sure you've heard of it. You see the courses of stone, the Dome of the Rock in the background. This, of course, used to be where the temple was, the temple of Solomon, and eventually the temple of Herod. Herod built a magnificent temple. We'll look at that more in a second. But you see the men are over on the left-hand side, the women in that fenced-in area are on the right-hand side. They don't mix in this area. You can see the courses of stone. These go back to the 1st century of Herod the Great. And you can see the prayers that are tucked in between the stones. This is a model of what the city of Jerusalem probably looked like in the 1st century. Very interesting, I think. And here you see the temple. You see the sharp things on the top. Of course, it's a model. It's not huge, but some people see this and they think it's the actual temple. You see the sharp things on the top so the birds don't land on there. The court inside, you can go inside the building and there's a court of the priests in here. And then, of course, you go further back in. There's 3 rooms inside, and the way in the back, of course, is the Holy of Holies, right? Where they went in once a year and sacrificed the lamb or the goat, and then sent it out into the wilderness. This is the court of the Israelites, where the Israelite men could go. This is a larger court where the women could go. So things are divided up here as well, in terms of where people were allowed to enter. This is a traditional room of the Last Supper. It's called the Canaculum. Nobody knows where most of these things took place, but this is a very old room, and traditionally it's assigned to the room of the Last Supper. This is Church of St. Mary Magdalene on the Mount of Olives. You see all the olive trees. Some of these olive trees are more than 2,000 years old, so they probably were around, some of them, when Christ was praying on the Mount of Olives, the Garden of Gethsemane. These are some ancient steps going back close to the 1st century, perhaps over some other steps, but maybe what the steps Jesus took when he was coming from the Mount of Olives up to the city of Jerusalem. And it's recognized today as the Via Dolorosa, the Way of Sorrows. One of the stations on the Way of Sorrows. One of those stations is a place where Jesus was scourged or whipped. And this is the traditional place that commemorates that. Within the city walls today, but it wasn't originally, is the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. Of course, traditionally, Jesus went outside the city walls and was crucified. But today, these are all within the city walls. But this is the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. Dark inside, but all these places are covered by churches churches built by Constantine. He built the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, the Church of the Nativity, and the Church of the Annunciation in Nazareth. A guy named Gordon came from Great Britain in the late 1800s, and he was looking for something that could be more traditional spot for where Jesus might die, something that looked more like where Jesus might die rather than the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. So this is known as Gordon's Calvary. And there's a tomb there. It's not where Jesus was buried. It's from the 2nd century. But you get a sense of what it might look like in the garden. Very interesting, I think. Here's a view of the Mount of Olives looking towards the east there. The Dome of the Rock there is in the foreground, of course. You see the Kidron Valley in between. And then I think it's just interesting to note this. I mean, here's the Garden of Gethsemane over here. Here is a, you know what this is? Cemetery. It's a cemetery. And a lot of Orthodox Jews are buried there. Why? Because there's a literal belief that they have to be buried here so that when the Messiah comes to the eastern gate, they will be there and they will be raised up when he comes. So a very literal belief in Jesus coming to the eastern gate and them being raised up at that time when Messiah comes. We're leaving Jerusalem and traveling down into the West Bank area. This is the tomb of Abraham. Of course, Abraham is looked upon not only as the father of Judaism, but also as the father of Islam. And so this is a mosque. And here's the tomb, or the Pillar of Abraham it's called, commemorating his life and his death. There's still some of this primitive farming that goes on that I'm sure was similar to what happened in Bible times. This is near the town of Bethlehem. You can see a good place for a sheep to graze. I don't see a lot of green grass, but those terrace fields, this is in the winter, but when, in the summertime, after the rainy seasons come, they get really green, and there's plenty of places for shepherds to be, much like David might have had in these hillsides. In Bethlehem is the Church of the Nativity that I mentioned before. Emperor Constantine built these churches commemorating Jesus' birth. My slides are being not so good. If you leave Bethlehem and go through the Judean wilderness, you go down into the Qumran area. Can anybody tell me what this is? Anybody know?
Caves.
Cave. It's cave number 4. There's a number of caves there, but it's the famous cave number 4 where they found a lot of the ancient documents of the Bible. Anybody go to the ones up in the? Yeah, it was very interesting, wasn't it? They were found in glass or in clay jars like this. The reason they were preserved so well is because, well, actually it's not very accessible. Hard to get there. And also, you know, they were really found, the way I understand it, there was a Bedouin shepherd boy that was throwing rocks and he hit something. And so they eventually accessed those caves. And it's dry there. There's just hardly any moisture, some of the driest parts of the earth. So this papyrus was preserved for years. And a lot of the things that you saw at the Science Museum looked a lot like this, didn't they? Yeah. That would be Hebrew script. If you go further along from cave number 4 and down towards the Jordan River, you're following the Jordan River Valley, but it gets very dry and very rugged, and you get to Masada. Masada was a fortress. It was Herod fortress. He used to go there for his retreats and for vacation. But it also became a place where people lived. And it, okay, maybe this is why they get rid of slides. They don't work very well. From Masada, you see the Dead Sea. And that's what it looks like. It's It was a place where when the Jewish-Roman War broke out in 66 AD, and it went on to 73 AD, the last holdout of the faithful Jews was at Masada. And you see the stones around a camp. That would have been a Roman camp back in the 1st century, as they camped out here and eventually planned their way to get to the top of Masada. And what they did is they built these embankments so that they could bring their troops right up the side of the bank and eventually knock down the walls that were on the outside and conquer the people. And I don't know if you know the story, but eventually what happened? Did they wait for the Romans to get there? No, they committed suicide. Rather than to die at the hands of an infidel, they committed suicide. If you go further down from Masada, you get into the Sinai Peninsula, and it's a big stretch of land that goes all the way down to the Gulf of Eilat. So imagine, this is the wilderness that Israel wandered in for 40 years. You can see why they had their doubts from time to time, right? Perhaps there's a little oasis there. You see there's some green. Maybe there's some water there, right there in the middle. But I can't imagine it anything other than rugged. We were going down there because we wanted to visit the traditional Mount Sinai. And this is St. Catherine's Monastery, which is built at the base of Mount Sinai, or the traditional Mount Sinai. And I think I've shared this before, but I think it's worth repeating, that this is the traditional Mount Sinai. And do you know why it's considered Mount Sinai by some people, by some scholars? Because it's the only volcanic mountain in all the Sinai Peninsula. And with all the fire and with all the volcanic, seemingly volcanic action that's going on there, perhaps this was the place of Mount Sinai. So St. Catherine's Monastery is there, and I don't know if you know this, but some of the oldest manuscripts of the Bible were also found here, and been a tremendous treasure in translating some of the newer translations of the Bible, like the Revised Standard Version. These are all scenes from St. Catherine's Monastery. Just a few slides from Galilee. This is Nazareth. And you see over to the left, right there in the middle, is the Church of the Annunciation. Again, built by Emperor Constantine. Picture from inside, celebrating Jesus as carpenter. The Sea of Galilee is not far away. Still fishing boats out on that sea. And that's what the sea looks like. The Church of the Beatitudes. Perhaps Jesus was on this hill overlooking the sea when he preached the Sermon on the Mount and gave people the Beatitudes, and all the crowds came out to him. There's a church nearby that celebrates the multiplication of the loaves and fishes. You know, this is perhaps the area where he fed the 5,000 with 5 little loaves and 2 fish. And we stopped briefly in Athens, and you can imagine Paul in these Roman and Greek cities, and the experience. Of course, over to the right is the Acropolis, and there's Paul preaching on the Acropolis or nearby. Actually, the Areopagus, if you remember from, I think it's chapter 17, where Paul is preaching from the Areopagus to the people. If he were on this rock, it would have been quite high. This is a view looking down, and you can see, and you can imagine what it was like when Paul was here. All this was part of what was known as the marketplace, or the agora. And people would have come, it would have been bustling, there would have been statues, there would have been temple. You can see there's some old pillars here. There would have been a temple here, another temple there that I'm sure has been rebuilt. And there were gods and goddesses on every street corner. And there's what one of the gods looked like. kind of hairy. And one more view of the Acropolis. Alright, well that was a quick tour through the Holy Land. Thank you for staying extra. Any questions on that or anything else? Otherwise, go in peace. Create a place for all to belong.